To just hear briefly who all you are before we go too much further. So, and Frank Dalma from the Humphrey School.
My name is Dan McNeil. I'm a graduate student in urban and regional planning at the Humphrey School.
Michael Johnson, program supervisor with the Minnesota Department of Transportation, Office of Transit.
Erin Grandiat, Itasca County engineer.
Matt Wegworth, Grand Rapids City engineer.
Ryan Sutherland, assistant county engineer at Itasca County.
Britta Arndt, Grand Rapids Herald Leading Newspaper.
Eric Villeneuve, Health and Human Service Director for Itasca County.
Sandy Lehman, representative for District 5B that includes much of Itasca and Cass County.
Chris Fulton with the Grand Rapids Area Community Foundation.
Vic Williams, Itasca County Sheriff.
Scott Johnson, Grand Rapids Police Department.
Diane Meyer, Employment Support Services for Minnesota Diversified Industry. Sandy Wheelacore, Transportation Manager for Arrowhead Transit.
I'm Dan Crocker with NPR, based in Duluth.
And Myrna Peterson from Mobility Media.
And for those of you who had been following on the agenda, wondering how we were going to get back on schedule in a half hour with a 25-minute late start, we're now 5 minutes ahead. So, what we really want to do today is hear from you regarding what opportunities you see, what questions you have, and so forth relating to deployment of self-driving vehicle technologies in the Grand Rapids or the Itasca County area. But before we dive into that conversation, it always is useful to provide a little bit of context. So I thought I would just share some slides about the work we've done for you to kind of at least understand where we're coming from, and then we can move forward from there. So this is a project that's part of a program we call the Transportation Policy and Economic Competitiveness Program. It's located at our little corner of the Humphrey School. And it's in partnership with the Center for Transportation Studies at the U. And we look at 3 different areas in particular: finance, industry clusters and freight, and technology. And this, as you might expect, falls within the technology section of our research. We are looking to create tools for policymakers and engage in outreach to look at the relationship between transportation and economic development, economic competitiveness. And in this case, we're looking at how technology can be deployed in the form of self-driving vehicles to be able to allow more people to be engaged in the workforce, to have more productive lives, and therefore push along Minnesota's economic competitiveness that way. Now, we didn't get started in self-driving vehicles by looking at the economic terms. We got into it from looking at the safety question. Several of you in the room probably could quote safety statistics as well or better than I could, but we always mention that in 2015, there were 35,000 transportation-related deaths in the United States. It was higher in 2016. It's much higher than that worldwide. And in particular, more than 90% of those have been estimated by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration to be attributable, at least in part, to human error. So while we're not going to guarantee that the technology will make us safer, there's an opportunity to at least help humans become better and safer drivers. And that's where we started to look at the technology here. Now, when we talk about self-driving vehicle technologies, probably several different types of vehicles appear in your head. Whether it's a vehicle that looks a lot like a conventional car. This is one that is an Audi. It drove across the country in 2015. with, they said 95% of the time on its own, the driver was there to read a book or something like that. The main activity that happened requiring human intervention was that they had to change the license plate when they crossed the California-Nevada line, because Nevada requires a certain license plate for self-driving vehicles. This vehicle may also look familiar to you. This is what I've later learned was called I believe the Firefly or the Dragonfly, but a couple of colleagues and I have just called it the rubber bumper buggy from Google. It has no steering wheel, it has no brake pedal. It is a vehicle that just was able to operate within the areas where it knew the map and took everybody along that was in it as a passenger. Different again is this one from Mercedes. It does have a steering wheel that you will see and a brake pedal, but the windows can be opaque, so you can watch a 360 surround movie while you're driving along because you're not driving. Also, within this vehicle is the ability to turn the seats around. If you think about it from the safety perspective, when we have very young children, we put them facing backwards because that's the safest way. That also applies to us. So why not? You can turn around and actually talk to the people in the back seat because the vehicle is able to operate on its own. Now those are the car type vehicles that are being developed. There are also vehicles that look more like shuttles. This is one from NVIDIA that can carry about 6 to 12 people. Similarly, this is one that's made by Polaris, their GEM, Global Electronic Mobility Vehicle. And it's operating in a demonstration in Detroit right now, shuttling some employees of a large company back from the parking area to their offices, using a technology developed in Ann Arbor called May. That's why it says May instead of Polaris on it. But again, about 6 passengers. This is where we start to then think about, if we don't think just about cars like we all own, or most people own, and we start thinking about different shaped vehicles, like these shuttles, maybe we're talking about something that could be more like transit. And this is where we start to look at mobility for people who can't drive. Something that the American with Disabilities Act may come into play. Right now, it's relies only to transit, that the transit service you provide needs to be as accessible for people with disabilities as it is for able-bodied people. There are some other programs like this. The United We Ride is a federal multi-agency program trying to improve mobility and access for everyone. The Olmsted court decision requires that kind of provision. Minnesota has the Council on Transportation Access, a multi-agency state-level organization looking to do this, and they have been part of developing and seeing the implementation of Minnesota's Olmsted Plan, which requires some level of service, including 50% increase in greater Minnesota transit trips by 2025, expanding transit coverage so that 90% of the public transportation service areas meet minimum service guidelines by 2020. Mike may be able to tell me if these need to be updated or how they came to be. But the inability to drive still reduces access. When you look into what those numbers mean, it still means that people who can't drive don't have the same mobility and access as people who can. And it becomes something that affects just about all of us. And you look at the senior population, by 2030, nearly 1 in 4 Minnesotans will qualify as a senior and have their kids looking at them as, you're not really going to drive that car much longer, are you? Back to the economic side briefly, there was a study that came out not quite a year ago from Ruderman and Securing America's Energy Future that stated that if we were able to deploy technology to get people who can't drive into the workforce because they have the same mobility and access, it could result in, I want to say $100 million more being put into the economy each year. I might have a zero off on that, but significant increase to economic activity in the United States. A couple of years ago, there was a bill in the Minnesota legislature to look at self-driving technologies to improve mobility for people with disabilities. National Council on Disabilities did a study about 2 years ago that included some model legislation and so forth, and significantly the Florida Department of Transportation did a survey that ascertained a considerable amount of benefit that can come to significant parts of Florida's population, that is the seniors and so forth that populate that state. Now when we talk about accessibility, we need to think about more than can you and I get in and out of the car. We need to think more about than just can we get somebody into this vehicle, because if you are not driving it, you have to tell it where you want to go. Here's an example of a touch screen, which could work for most people, but if you are vision impaired, it's not going to work so well for you. On the flip side, you could have a vehicle that's got a very good voice recognition technology to be able to take care of that, but if you aren't, if you don't have something to on the visual side, then people with hearing disabilities are not going to benefit very much. And then just to go back through these, to get back to that Mercedes, you can't get a wheelchair in there very easily either. Now, I'm not going to take credit for this, but this is Volkswagen that came out last spring in their vehicle, concept being self-driving vehicle, and it has doors that open sideways like that. It was in Geneva, Switzerland. Unfortunately, I was not able to be there with a tape measure, so I can't tell you if that is a 3-foot space that you could wheel into, or if it has a ramp, but certainly they make the space flexible enough inside that you would be able to get in with a number of different abilities instead of the way able-bodied people are able to get into their car. Here's another example. The Easy 10 is actually being worked on by MnDOT for a demonstration on the Minroad facility, and with any luck, I think they want to demonstrate it on Nicollet Mall in Minneapolis for the Super Bowl. This definitely has a ramp. It's ADA compliant, and really this is where we start to ask the question of what can communities do to be able to prepare for these technologies. And that is a question we asked of this task force that we convened at the Humphrey about a year ago, looking at how the technology can be deployed to benefit the transportation disadvantaged populations in Minnesota. We wanted to bring together elected officials, policy experts, advocates, government officials, and more. And one of the things that we identified is that there's an opportunity in greater Minnesota that really has not been explored very deeply. This helped us to develop what we call the Usability Matrix. I will show you a copy that you won't be able to read on my slides here, but before then I will show you where you can find it yourself. And I'm not sure if we've got paper copies here or not, but I'll talk my way through it so you can see what it is and how we figured out there's different ways to deploy these technologies. So again, the website is tpec.umn.edu, and if you go to the research tab, you'll see a completed research, and right on the top is this report, and you can pull up the PDF and see the matrix, which looks a lot like this. In particular, what we're looking at is, on the left side is the ways you might deploy these technologies in major metropolitan areas, then to suburbs, then to small cities, and then to rural areas, small towns, and so forth. what we saw was there's a lot of discussion about how you can deploy these technologies in major urban areas. You can deploy those shuttles like the EZ10 or NVIDIA or something like that in kind of an Uber-like way, or a Lyft type way, to get some equal time here, you can share the rides. If you don't share the rides, you at least share the vehicle. I need a car, I need a ride, I dial it up on my smartphone, it shows up my front door, it takes me where I need to go, I get out, and somebody else is waiting there immediately or shortly thereafter to get into it and go somewhere else. That requires a pretty high level of density. It's something that you could see working in a suburban setting where you've got some high capacity transit going on freeways or something like that, but your issue is the first mile, last mile, going from a low density suburban development to that higher density transit. These vehicles could again circulate through the neighborhood and be able to serve people that way, getting them to higher capacity transit at the same level of convenience, speed as if they had their own car, without the problem of having to park that car and walk from your parking ramp to where you're going. What we looked at when it came to other areas, though, is we don't see that kind of density, but maybe there's an opportunity for more local types of cooperation to be able to own these vehicles and share the rides and not have the same overhead that is required of a for-profit operation. And this was brought to us by participants in the group, is that rural transit is something that works, that does a very good job for what it tries to do in greater Minnesota. But if you were not constrained by needing to recruit drivers, and you had a vehicle that could be available more often or operate on a lower overhead, you could double or triple or quadruple the number of trips that are available by deploying a vehicle like this. You maybe still aren't getting to the mobility and access of someone who owns their own car and can drive it, but you are significantly increasing the ability to offer transit in areas like this. So that was some great thinking. It happened significantly at the Humphrey School, which is in Minneapolis and part of the University of Minnesota. We had people from outside, but we hadn't gotten out of our comfort zone to try and talk with folks who might actually deploy these technologies if they agreed that this was an opportunity. So we wanted to come to Grand Rapids because Myrna told us this is the first place we should come to do this conversation. And we'd like to go to a couple other places in the state and continue that conversation. Get your thoughts and opinions about the technology. Do you know some things that I didn't mention that you think could be an opportunity? Do you have questions about it that make you skeptical as to whether this could actually work? And other types of issues. I'd love to hear that. Again, I'll close out here with just a mention that you could improve transit in many different ways by deploying these vehicles without actually getting into a question of whether we should cut transit funding or a question of whether we need to own our own cars. But just looking at the ability to improve transit is something that we'd like to talk about, whether that's a legitimate possibility. We've gotten some coverage on this. The Humphrey School Communications Office, they actually did a video of me. If you go to cibios, cibios.umn.edu, you can see me basically say what I just said. More significantly, we did this article in the Humphrey newsletter that features Myrna, talking about this opportunity, how it can be a cutting edge thing to do. That's what brought Dan to us. So the buzz is good. I didn't even mention market capitalization or how much money GM or Ford or Waymo are all thinking they can make out of this stuff, because we just want to talk about what could be the benefits out in areas like Grand Rapids. So that's the extent that I'm going to present. And if there's any questions immediately, I'd be happy to take them. Otherwise, Dan, you've got my agenda there. We're moving. What's next on the?
Well, we're going to take a little break to set up the panel, so that's a transition to the panel.
All right. So yeah, I'd be happy to take any questions first, and then we can go into the panel. That's gotten anybody's mind going?
What's the financial model? Is it a pay-to-ride kind of deal, or?
Right, yeah, that was the part I didn't mention, is if you think about like the way Lyft or Uber does their financial transactions, is that you pay by the ride. And that's the idea where this would work, is instead of owning this vehicle, you would just have your app on your phone or other way to call the vehicle, and it would show up and you would be charged just for the cost of that trip, as opposed to needing to own the vehicle yourself. And
Has
then
there been any studies put into the impact on existing transit? A lot of times in this area, we have really good bus and different types of transit that we already have in existence. The effects of this, does it impact that at all? Is there, it's too early to tell what the impact would be?
Yeah.
I know taxis just love Uber drivers.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Yeah. In terms of the drivers themselves, that's a complicated question. How you're going to deploy these to be able to make sure that you're not just kicking them out on the street, as taxi drivers in particular have become worried about with Uber and Lyft. In terms of its relationship to transit, I see this as just an evolution of transit. It's a way to supplement what exists and changes the ways that it's being done. There are others who say that we can replace transit with this, but I think about transit as a service that gets people from point A to point B, and that's where this can help. Whether it's replacing human-driven vehicles, should the technology really succeed, eventually we may get there, but it's not going to be in a situation that's fast enough that we should stop investing in our current type of transit.
so what's the authority that it operates under? Is it a municipal-based oversight? Is it a partnership with the transit existing already? Who changes the tire if it goes flat? I mean, I think about all these things, that Myrna's out somewhere and she's stranded, or a signal goes out, or there's an equipment failure. Who does the time and attention to that part?
Right. That would be, this is just a vehicle, so it would be whatever entity owns the vehicles, owns the fleet, would be responsible for its proper maintenance. In terms of the authority to operate on the streets, a colleague of mine has done what's kind of the seminal article on that in Law Reviews called Self-Driving Vehicles Are Probably Legal in the United States. Basically looking at the existing laws, and there's really nothing that says you cannot have a vehicle that is driven by a machine operating on our streets, so long as it's meeting the other, crashworthiness and other design features. When it comes to who's liable if this actually hits something, which they should not do, and they should not be deployed, NHTSA should not say they should go out there until they're very, very rarely hitting something. And it's a question that the insurance companies are looking at, but Google and Mercedes and Volvo have all said that they will take on the product liability should something go wrong in the vehicle, so that there's coverage that way.
Two questions. I know these are all prototypes, but is there a cost to, a standardized one? I mean, is this something that a person would buy themselves, or more of a fleet type?
It's probably more of a fleet type situation. The costs are coming down so that you could eventually conceivably buy one of these on your own. But even now, the Teslas that have what we call level 2 kind of partial automation, are significantly more expensive than a conventional car. So the opportunity to share the rides and have the cars generating revenue as opposed to sitting in a parking lot and costing us money makes a real case for the sharing business model. Does that answer that question?
It's just a real obvious question that, as Minnesotans we would ask is we all get a little nervous this time of the year with the icy, snowy road conditions. How does a driverless vehicle perform?
Remember why I said it's not going to happen fast enough for us to stop investing in conventional transit right now? That is one of the great hurdles the technology is working with, and that's one reason why MnDOT wants to demonstrate this vehicle at the Super Bowl in February in Minneapolis, to show that we're getting to the point that the vehicles are starting to understand how to operate in snow and ice and so forth. To this point, the largest demonstrations have been in Phoenix, Austin, Texas, Silicon Valley, places where the weather usually does not become a problem because they want to just perfect that part of the technology first. On the other hand, half of this country receives snow and ice, so if this technology is really going to work, they have to play to the national market. They can't just sell it down south and presume it's going to be something that takes on. I don't know if Michael would like to talk about this or not.
Would you like to talk about the bus?
I can talk a little bit about it.
Sure.
So we are testing an autonomous bus. It's an autonomous bus pilot project. This project started with phase 1 back in February. We are identifying partners to work with us on that. We put out an RFP for autonomous bus manufacturers, and we have a contract now with Easy Mile. It's one of the small, slow, autonomous vehicles. We didn't get any bids for a larger bus because those aren't really available right now in the U.S. So we'll be testing that vehicle for cold weather, winter operations, to see how it performs in snow, ice, and with salt. So we'll be identifying challenges and seeing if we can come up with some solutions and just get a better understanding of how this technology will work in our existing transportation infrastructure. So as part of that, we're planning for a live demonstration during the week of the Super Bowl, assuming everything goes well on our mid-road test facility. We'll be hopefully having a live test with passengers during that week. So I'm from the Office of Transit. There's a separate team that's dealing with the autonomous bus pilot project, so I'm not directly involved with that specific testing. Within the Office of Transit, we've been talking about how this might mesh with our existing transportation transit funding systems. So funding for transit throughout the state comes through our office. We have 41 transit systems throughout the state that receive state and federal funding through our office. So the goal within our office, that was mentioned before, is to meet 90% of the transit need by 2025. So we administer state and federal grants, and we provide funding for buses and for operations of the bus systems. So it's all on a percentage base. There's a local share required, but more than half of the funding for those transit systems is from state and federal funds. So when I think of autonomous buses, I think of the operating capital grants that we have, that if this technology becomes available, it would make sense for transit systems to own this just like they own the other buses and vehicles that they operate and maintain, and that assuming that they're approved for use and work with the system, that they could possibly be funded through the existing transit funding sources sometime in the future.
And Mike did make a point that I did not make about these smaller shuttle-type vehicles, as they are currently low-speed vehicles. They're designed to operate at about 25 miles an hour. So kind of neighborhood circulator, downtown sort of circulator type of operation at this point. They don't go out on the highways. NVIDIA was one of the makers, just announced that they've created a minivan looking like thing that can operate at up to 55 miles an hour, but that's just being rolled out right now. So the ones that are operational are currently looking at a lower speed type of operation.
Does this require 100% connectivity to the internet?
Not necessarily. At the risk of going into too much detail, one reason why why the technology is accelerated is because Google, in developing their technology, created a technology that was entirely based within the car. The car's sensors and maps and so forth understood where it was and what the boundaries were that it was dealing with, and it literally was autonomous. There are advantages to adding some connectivity to that, such as the being warned that there's an icy patch 5 vehicle lengths ahead of you, or that there's a crash a half mile away. Those sudden changes in the situation that could allow more efficient operation if you do have that kind of connectivity. Not required, but there probably will be some movement, I think, to integrate connectivity as the deployment goes forward.
And would there be some type of interaction with the passenger in the vehicle, connectivity or whatever, where a human observation could be relayed to the vehicle, like a little kid jumping a wall into the street, and the person inside will stop the vehicle or something like that? Or there's things in there that do this?
In most situations, the technology should respond to that faster than a human, but I would suggest that anytime you have a vehicle like this, you need to have some sort of emergency stop button, just in case something seems like it's not right. Same way we get on an elevator and there's still an emergency call button to give us that opportunity.
Can you talk a little bit about who's going to buckle in?
Well, that's some of the questions about what is the importance of to be able to make it work and fly. There's some discussion that if these vehicles so rarely crash, you would not need to have the same level of seatbelt requirement and so forth. But on the other hand, if there is a need to be able to get actually fastened in and so forth, that's a level of detail that I've not gotten to look at yet. If you get a chance to talk with the folks from Easy 10 when they're demonstrating at the Super Bowl, ask them that question. That would be useful. And for the most part, I mean, that's if you're dealing with the person who needs to have an attendant on the ride, that person would be the attendant and not the driver. But when it's a matter of just making sure that you're properly secured, I'm not sure if the designers have totally gotten to that level, but that seems to be, light, snow, and ice, something that they ought to be working with at this level right now.
And we don't all want to seem like we're skeptics. We do have a lot of questions because you bring it out here, and technology and its implementation has had a lot of roadblocks. Whether it's just the physical portions, failures in power, system failures where you don't get a signal anymore. Now that autonomy of the vehicle, having everything within it, makes more sense to me now. I can't wait till it hits one of Grand Rapids' roundabouts and just can't get out of it.
Have to get rid of the roundabouts then.
Easy Mile and NVIDIA are French companies. Britain has some folks who are working on it too. They've got a lot more roundabouts there, so I think they've got the cards how to handle getting around the roundabout.
All right. It's got pretty precious cargo, so we are trying to make sure we're covering it.
Oh, and that's why we're here, because we knew that sitting where we were, we wouldn't be able to come up with the actual questions about what needs to be addressed to be able to take advantage of the technology.
So there are some test vehicles out there, but what is the real timeline on when something might be, ready to hit the street?
Generally, in terms of being available so that just about anybody can dial up a ride on one of these, there had been consensus within the last year that we were looking at the 2030 to 2040 timeframe. But then MnDOT got Easy Mile to bring their vehicle to the Twin Cities to be demonstrated in a few months. GM announced that they were no longer going to have internal combustion engines by 2023. And we see a lot of movement toward this fleet-based model in one way or another. And I'm starting to think that that 2030 timeline might be the far end. The bigger question is the technology could be ready that fast. How quickly and in what form are we going to have incentives and policy to deploy them in a way that will benefit the most people? That actually sounds like a fairly decent segue into setting up the panel then, as we can talk about what it could it mean here in Grand Rapids. So I will leave the podium and sit down, and we can ask the panelists that are here to come up, and we'll reconvene in a few minutes. We've got an esteemed panel here, most of whom you heard mention their names and positions earlier. If you don't recognize who they are, you can probably ask because you know them better than I do. I've got a few questions that I would like each of them to answer to get started here. And then we can open it up to a general conversation with everyone. But I just wanted to get a little more of a feel for what people see is happening here in Grand Rapids. And so, Myrna, we'll start down with you. And the first question I'd like to hear from each of you an answer on is, what do you see as the current and future transportation needs in this community?
Well, I can speak for myself and other people with mobility issues, that I like to get around town to a lot of events that are happening. We have excellent transportation opportunities during the daytime, but after 8 o'clock at night, Monday through Friday, and on the weekends, it's very limited. And I live 2 miles within the city limits, but it's about 5 miles from my house to the other end of town, which I frequent oftenly. And quite frankly, I need a heater and a hood in the wintertime and when it rains. So I see that as we don't have currently an accessible taxi or any other transportation. I do have my own van, but it takes somebody to drive that as well. So I speak for a lot of people with mobility issues that's a real need. It was the #1 priority when we did public forums around the county.
So we don't need to, we'll just go down the line. Speak from your own perspective. You don't need to necessarily talk specifically to the transportation disadvantage, but trying to get a feel for just what are the forecasted transportation needs of the area.
So from my perspective, I guess what I can just simply say about transportation need in Itasca County is, we are a very rural county, as you all know, and that does make getting places difficult. And certainly precludes people from job opportunities throughout our community. So just access to more transportation, I think, is necessary. And, I drive my own car every day, and I'll be honest that for me, maybe like a lot of people, I certainly want that to be convenient too. So that would be my concern.
I think one of the big things I see as a current need is just the funding side. We have a lot of roads and a lot of streets, but how are we going to fix these roads and how are we going to pay for them? To allow people access throughout the city, throughout the county, we need accessible roads too. So that's kind of one of the big needs I see.
I think that the current transportation transit that we have in this town is very good, but I do see the population aging more and more, and it is such a rural area. There is a lot of community that is not within the city limits that does not have any service, and those people are aging as well and going to be needing transportation. I think that the aging population wants to stay in their own homes, and I think that it's going to be something that we are going to have to look at expanding our service areas, which is difficult. The further from town that you go, you have to have more buses and more transportation options. If you just take what you have currently, you're just reducing what you have within the city limits. So I think that we need to look at a broader area that we cover and give transportation options to.
What's the need? Well, as I look around this town, more and more people look like me with gray hair. We have an aging population all over the state of Minnesota, but especially in the outstate areas. It's a real difficult conversation to have with somebody as to why they should no longer be driving. We need good transportation. We have some mass transit transportation that's exceptional, but it has to be expanded. It's got to be convenient. It's got to be affordable. It's got to be efficient. It's got to be effective. And it isn't just for older citizens, although we're seeing more older citizens out there. Just walk or drive up and down Waukegan Avenue every month of the year and look at the number of people out on bicycles. And I can guarantee you in the middle of January, it's not because they want to get exercise. There's a number of people out there for whatever reason don't have driver's licenses or don't have access to transportation. And I think that's one of the advantages of having a transportation system that's been proposed here.
Yeah, it should cover it. No, what I'm talking about when they do the combinations of the people who need mobility, the aging demographic that we deal with in Minnesota statewide, when they talk about stuff like this, my concerns from the sheriff's perspective start to turn towards safety, accessibility, the fact that people that would be utilizing these may be in a vulnerable status, may be seen as a target. And I would want to make sure that we go to the extent that, like having the bus driver that's watching his mirrors or monitoring what's going on, that there's something that would also preserve the safety of the individuals doing this. Technology goes in so many directions and it's moving so fast. Like Karen and the engineers are talking about, can our infrastructure keep pace with this? Can we physically build the accommodations to keep what the technology advances? So from the safety perspective, if I see that it's a baby boomer who just came out of Thrifty White, I know they've probably got a prescription on them. And now they are alone. So we would want to make sure we take every measure to make sure that that continues to follow them in a secure environment.
Keep the microphone down here for the next question, which is just on the positive side right now. We'll move to the questions and the potential issues as the last question. But what are the opportunities then that you see from either what I said or your own knowledge from self-driving technologies to address some of those needs?
Well, the self-driving portions of it, that is a positive aspect, is that it's opening avenues for these people who were so secluded, that were limited simply by the physical and the inability to access this stuff. So from a positive note, and I've watched this for years. My mother's been limited in her mobility for 60 years. And until you're truly in that place where you have to depend on others in order to even run to the grocery store, like Karen says, to lose driving my vehicle to work, suddenly I'm depending on someone else. Just the unleashing of that simple freedom would allow for them a whole new variety of options. My fear is like with Myrna, she'll get in that car and she'll go Miller Hill Mall, Duluth, and you'll see that. Will it someday be that way? We hope so. Just gotta hope there's one on that end to bring you back though, okay?
A year and a half, 2 years ago, I wrote a letter to go into a time capsule at Old Central School. And the letter, or the time capsule, is supposed to be opened up 100 years from now. I don't think I'm going to be here. But one of the things I put in the letter is, and this is supposed to be a letter to the police department 100 years from now, and one of the things we put in the letter was, policing is policing. We're still answering the same types of calls that were answered here in Grand Rapids 100 years ago. Still going to domestic disputes, taking theft reports, and going to, crashes, accidents of some type. And I was told by my patrol officers, you better take that out of there. I said, why? Because people won't be driving cars, they'll be driving themselves. So I took it out. When we take a look at self-driving cars, I think we have a tendency to look at people driving cars versus cars driving themselves. And I'm not really sure it's that. It's more of a spectrum. It's not if we're going to go down this road, it's how quickly and when. We already see some cars that have blind spot avoidance, self-braking. I understand that there's even a pickup truck that'll back up your boat trailer for you. Now that's what I want. So we're going to get there. It's just a matter of when. I think we'll see less accidents, but this is a public policy issue. It's just not a technical issue. It's a social issue. It's an economic issue. It's a political issue. There's going to be certainly an educational issue as part of it as well. So we're going to be there. It's going to be a safer mode of operation. I think what we're going to see eventually is we're going to see a tipping point. Some year down the road, there's going to be more of a demand for self-driving vehicles than those that are being driven by human beings. But I think, at least in the immediate future, there's going to have to be the option, self-driving and human intervention. A lot of citizens of Grand Rapids and Itasca County go out in the forest to go hunting. How are they going to figure out where Shingle Mill Road is, or the logging trail off from there? So it's going to have to be a combination of both.
When I think of self-driving cars and buses, I think of a whole new world opening up for everybody. I have a father who's 87 years old. He still drives. Every time he gets in the car, I'm frightened, but he still does it. What if there was a self-driving vehicle that could come and pick him up and take him wherever he wanted to go? And I think of how much safer I think it would be for him and probably for others on the road as well. So when I think of buses, I think of this community, and I'm in the transit business, and there's never enough. We could just keep throwing buses out there, bus after bus, and there would always be more people riding them. The numbers just keep going up and up. So I guess when I think of that, I think that they could be very safe. I think that it would open up a whole new world for many people who don't have transportation options right now. I guess that's it.
When I think about the opportunities, and it's been said a couple times, but just providing that access, and not necessarily just the elderly, but people that don't have vehicles in general, but it has to figure out a way to make it affordable, instead of calling a taxi or a cab, to have these vehicles going out, opening up job opportunities for people that, can't, or, get to a job, looking at it from that aspect. And then also just, as we move forward, the expanding the local community with additional, depending on who operates these, additional jobs that way. It's not just the drivers of the vehicles, but just expanding our community and our workforce. So, I look at it kind of from an employment aspect, that I think those opportunities are pretty great for improving our community that way.
Generally, from a safety perspective, I think about the Towards Zero Death initiative that we have in Minnesota, and I think there comes a point at which it's going to be difficult to continue to reduce accidents that occur, or crashes, as they say, versus accidents, because we are human and we will continue to make error. And if there can be technology that reacts faster than I can react, that might be a way to really significantly impact the Towards Zero Death initiative. And I do think there will come a time that we won't make a lot of progress towards zero deaths, because we are human and we will always be driving them. So I don't know that zero it's a great goal, but it will be pretty difficult to attain without some technology improvement.
I look at the opportunities for myself and other people in my situation. Affordability is key, because financially I'm not as solvent or able to make kind of financial gains that I was at one time. But after 22 years of being in this chair, it gives me a new perspective on, it's liberating to think that I don't need to call someone to come and drive my van. I don't need to be sure that I call for a ride home by 4 o'clock within the deadlines for right now for the time limitations. If I want to come home anytime, it's there'd be something available, and just liberating for me. The opportunities are endless, and but at the same time cautious about who is going to attend to me to make sure that I get in at the door. I have one thumb that works, but a mouth that won't quit. So if I have the technology that can listen to my voice, it sounds great. It's a great opportunity.
Well, I appreciate everybody really sticking to the positive side there. We started to come to a vision. We heard safety, we heard accessibility, we heard economic opportunity. This is something that commonly comes up in these conversations, is that people really start to believe that we'll all but bring about world peace with these technologies. But you also started to mention you had some questions. You saw an education issue, you had an affordability issue. Can we ask you to go back down the line and talk more explicitly about what are these questions you have, what concerns remain?
Well, the concern for me will be the safety of me getting into the vehicle. Typically now, I'm secured in my van by a safety lock, or in the bus with tie downs. The thought of moving in a vehicle is a little bit insecure when I'm unsteady with my own mobility. That would be one concern I'd have. And then again, I used to live 6 miles out of town in Deer River on County Road 44, and then to get to another county road, will that vehicle be able to find its way in a rural setting? We're not in an urban where it knows every street, and that's a concern that I'd have. But I believe in technology, and I think there'll be a way. So I'm not really concerned. It's just a question.
I would have similar questions. I don't know a lot about the technology at all, so I'm not familiar with how it works, but when I do think about winter conditions and sensors on a vehicle, I think about snow and ice covering those sensors and whether or not, I have a backup camera on my car, and sometimes I look in that little screen and I don't see anything because it's covered with ice. So I'm certain that there's ways around those things, but I don't have, I don't know how that technology works. So that's a question for me. And whether or not this technology operates on a map, if I tell it, somewhat like police chief said, if I say Shingle Mill Road, will it know? And then if it does know that, then I have a question, because sometimes we change the road names and how we have connectivity throughout. Already that's a challenge that we have with MapQuest and Google Maps, that if a road name changes, to get that changed through all the systems that we have today is difficult. So then UPS won't be able to find a certain place, or you can't order something online because the address is different. So my concern would be how that would affect any of this technology.
I'd like to bring that up, but that is huge. I've heard that as well about just Google Maps and so forth, which changes by the minute within the city, but in towns outside of cities, that they complain for months that something's inaccurate and never gets fixed. So that's a point that we'll need to continue to pay attention to.
Yeah, I know if you use Google Maps to give you directions, sometimes you hear about that occasionally where it sends you to the wrong place, and so, again, concerns that way. Looking at it and, also the safety, because at some point it's still going to be humans driving, and, the autonomous vehicles, as we say, most, crashes occur because of human error. Well, you're in these vehicles, how do they react to others, running a red light or a stop sign, just those kind of things where, it may be difficult to, avoid that kind of collision. So, again, just like Karen said, a lot on the technology side, just how does it work with the sensors and the roads, and just reacting to other vehicles would be my big concern. So.
I guess I would have to say that my biggest concern would be for passenger safety, and I think that that is several-fold. I think that the transit system that we have right now has a very personal touch to it. That drivers on that bus, we handle people with many different disabilities. Maybe they're mental, maybe they're physical. There's an actual person there in case there's a problem, a medical emergency, a behavior issue. And I think that self-driving, you're going to lose that personal touch. Of course, there's the concern about the snow and the ice that we get. Everyone has said the same thing there. So I guess that my biggest concern would be for the personal safety of the passengers on these types of vehicles.
I would imagine it's going to be a large computer component to any such vehicle. Reminds me of a number of years ago during the Paris Air Show. They were demonstrating a brand new airplane, fly-by-wire, and that there aren't any push tubes or pulleys. All computer. They had to set up to land, and it was set up to land, it was set up to land, and it kept on flying forward in a nose-high position, right into the forest, crashed and burned. My concern is the human-computer interface. I'm also concerned about software security. Will these things be able to be hacked into? Software updates, maintenance updates, who's going to own them? Is it going to be the private sector? Is it going to be the public sector? Will transportation become a public right, if you will? Is there a profit motive? I also wonder how we're going to do police work. Are we going to be in these things that are self-driving? Right now, I was coming up Waukegan Avenue on the way to a personal injury accident just before coming here, and I could go around these vehicles, I could go into opposing traffic if need be safely, go through red lights. Are we going to be able to do that with self-driving vehicles? All these things have to be worked out. But more than anything else, I think the biggest challenge is going to be a paradigm shift, a way of thinking of transportation, and I'm not sure what the future holds there.
Oftentimes, what comes with anything that's new, is getting the old war horses to go along with it. A lot of times, the personal touch of the driver, the fact that we have those freedoms to be able to operate ourselves, there's got to be a give and take. My concern mimics everyone along the board, from the safety of the passengers to the interaction with the outside resources that we have no control over. The deer that run out in Grand Rapids in front of cars, the technology can recognize it, respond to it, but then advance. Will they be hacked? Will kids mess with them because they know if you run close enough to the sensors, the car will stop? These are all things we have to think through, but know that the goal at the end of the day is to create mobility and freedom for people who don't have it. And the key to the entire thing is education. Educate people around you as to how these will operate, what they're there for, who is inside them. Community cooperation will create a buffer that'll allow this to operate. And I think if we as a group start educating people, you will find money to fund it, you will find people to operate them, and you'll find an entity to endorse it. So if we can set the fears aside and take an ambitious step in a direction to see if it'll even work, I think we have to at least allow that.
So that raises in my mind a final question here, which is actually in two parts. Then we can bring it up to the others in attendance. But one, do you see the opportunity as being enough greater than the questions and obstacles to pursue it? And if so, complete blank sheet of paper, how would you like to see these technologies address those questions? What do you think might be the best way to deploy technologies in Grand Rapids to achieve those benefits?
Well, like any laboratory, I think that once you establish a good sound base, then you create conditions and an operations within a controllable area to allow it to flow first. Know that at a certain time, this may take certain stops along the way, and until you get a pattern down and educating people as to its operation, when you see this, this is what these are, this is the rules that are around them. Like say you had a stop at City Hall, the DMV, and the hospital to start out, to make sure, and it gives comfort to the people who utilize it. It gives a set pattern so all of us know for safety reasons if something is wrong, we know it's within this realm. That controlled environment would give us a good snapshot of it to begin to expand. And right now, and all of us know it, the operations, the self-parking vehicles, the backing up the trailers, the automation's out there, the technology's out there. Now we're having it done with someone who necessarily doesn't have full control over it. And if we can take the steps in that direction, I still think that the freedom that this would allow opens an opportunity for us to at least give it a chance.
Is it worth pursuing? I don't think we have any choice but to pursue it. If we don't pursue it in the United States and in Minnesota, there's going to be international, there's going to be other countries that's going to pursue it. These companies, these auto manufacturing companies, they're looking 30, 40 years down the road. They've committed to it. It's going to happen. It's already started to happen. How do you roll it out? That's good. You know, as I said, it's a multifaceted policy issue. The problem with public policy, and it is indeed a public policy, is implementation. I don't have a magic ball. I don't know how this thing will roll out. I'm guessing they'll do, maybe they'll take a page from the past, you know, when electricity, this new thing, electricity, first came out in Minnesota, the power companies would wire the towns and everybody else on the farms or on their own. I could see a self-driving car where the driver drives the car to a certain area, maybe downtown Grand Rapids, and from there on it's put on auto mode and it drives itself. And eventually I think you'll see more and more of these pods or these areas or these routes until eventually people are saying, we want them all over the state.
I think that you'd almost have to start something like this on a fixed route that, like Vic says, goes from one destination to the next. I think it would help build a sense in the community of trust. I think that that would be a huge hurdle. I think people are really not going to trust these until they see them in action for quite a while. I think that if you could add something like that to an existing system like we have now, I think it would be a great thing.
Yeah, I think it would certainly start in the downtowns and the low-speed communities, you know, where the network and the people are denser, to where you have that more users. You know, you get into the rural, and you know, if one person that uses it every 10 miles, you know, that gets to be a little more difficult. So it certainly would start in within the cities and go that route. You know, maybe there's a fleet of 3 of them that are, you know, rotating throughout the town, and you know, people can call and get picked up and do it that way. But yeah, certainly starting on a small scale is obviously the way they would have to go.
Well, I certainly think it's worth pursuing, and I would concur that whether we really want to or not, much like anything, technology is going to take us there one way or another. I don't disagree that starting in town is obviously the most logical thing to do, but by the same token, you know, I would never want to discourage a much larger view, because with Itasca County being as large and rural as it is, it's very necessary that people out there can have the same access to that transit that people could in town too. So.
Well, I definitely want to pursue it, and I will be first in line to be on that bus if it comes up. I do think too that it's a matter of trust. I know when people first saw me driving around all over the city in my wheelchair in less than good conditions outside, they were more worried than I was. And I totally trust technology. I'm a lover and user of technology. And I think it's definitely something that would be exciting to pursue. And I just hope that we have the education to go with it. I'm a firm believer that education is the key to a lot of our problems. And if we educate how it can be done safely for a wide range of people, accessibility for all ages and all abilities, it's the ticket for liberation for me and others as well.
Great, thank you. That's terrific to hear. But I'd like to open it up to the entire group. I'll start with just a very technical question, which is, should I do the Phil Donahue thing and run around with the microphone to each person? Would that be best, or can we repeat the question?
Sure, only be able to do it. I gotta look myself.
All right, very good. So this was excellent. I liked Scott's suggestion, or I should say Chief Johnson's suggestion, of looking at the way electricity was deployed. I'm Gen X. I think of a different technology, which is the way we got to mobile phones and smartphones. When I was a teenager, the cool thing was that you could call from your car. And once you got done and parked the car, but you wanted to continue the conversation, you wanted to take it out of the car. And once you got out of the car, you wanted to go away from the street and the right of way. And then you wanted to be able to do it outside of the cities and so forth, and you eventually demanded that you have coverage nearly everywhere. We still haven't gotten completely everywhere, but it's that, I think, same sort of model that is intriguing to me. So let's open it up to everyone. Same types of questions to you. You don't have to answer, but what do you see as opportunities? What do you see are needs that could be met? What questions do you still have?
I have more of just a few comments when I think of the technology and the importance of taking care of people. With our current transit system, we have passenger assistance, safety and security training that drivers are required to go through pretty often to make sure that they're taking care of all their passengers. And right now, there isn't technology that exists that can help someone get into the vehicle or to secure a wheelchair. So you still need people to perform those functions. And I think of some of the, that is a problem with the vehicle that doesn't have a driver. It's like, well, you could have passenger attendants instead of a driver. That self-driving vehicle isn't just a car or a bus. It has to be part of a system. So when I think of the transit system that we have right now, it's not just a bus and a driver. Arrowhead Transit has a dispatch that is staffed, and if the driver has a problem with the bus, it's called in dispatch. Hey, I got a problem with the bus. Hey, I got a problem with the passenger. And it's a team, that system is in place for the safety of passengers to make sure that that transportation system is operating the way that it should. So self-driving vehicles, for me, is no different than that. That perhaps, if you've got a system where after regular bus hours, there's a self-driving vehicle that's parked at a charging station until somebody calls. If they need assistance, the self-driving vehicle can pick up the volunteer attendant and then pick up the passenger. So there's technology, you can design a system to address some of those operational issues. Another thing that I wanted to comment on was just the thought of evolving technology. When I think of how technology evolves, I think of airplanes, because I'm a pilot. And Scott had mentioned an Airbus that crashed, one of the early demonstrations of auto landing technology and lift in the trees. So anytime that you have technology, there's always a human component. And with aircraft today, there are commercial systems that can virtually land an aircraft. It will navigate to the approach. It will line up on the runway. It will put the flaps down to keep the speed how it's supposed to be. It'll put the gear down. It will land. It'll apply the brakes without the pilot having to touch it. Category 3 landing system, it'll pretty much do it itself. Are we ever going to see pilotless commercial aircraft? Would you get in an airplane without a pilot on it? Well, that's the issue. It's not that the technology is not there. There's always the human component because we're humans. That's not going to change anytime soon. So the evolving technology and the regulations that go with it. Pilots, when Orville and Wilbur Wright first made the first airplane, there was no rules for flying. As crashes happened and people died, we developed safety regulations. Pilots have to be licensed. Aircraft have to be certified. It's the same with cars. You have to have a driver's license. Your vehicle has to meet certain safety standards. If these are autonomous vehicles, we already have the safety regulations in place for vehicles. The question is on drivers. So we've had for several years, I think of aviation, for the past decade, the military has been remotely piloting drones. Those things don't have pilots in them. The pilot's in a box somewhere operating the aircraft from the ground. So as a pilot, I just this past year got my commercial remote pilot's license. So I bought a drone from Best Buy and I can use it to take pictures and video. It also has an autonomous mode. I can set a route for it to fly, and I could push a button and it will do that without me touching the controls. What happens if that hits something? Well, it's my fault, because I'm the operator. I have to be licensed to be able to use that commercially, and I'm required to have insurance. I'm required to register as a commercial operator with MnDOT. So as these systems come in place, the regulations to ensure that that system is safe are going to come along with it. So it's not just a bunch of, driverless vehicles going to be unleashed on the roads. They're going to have to meet all the safety standards, and the system to make sure that those are safe is going to be built with them.
Those are excellent comments as well. Any other thoughts or questions for the panel, for me, of each other?
I just have one thought. I've spent my career in economic development, and so I've spent a lot of time thinking about how we overcome barriers in rural communities and supporting rural community on into the future so that all of us can choose to live where we want to live and still make a living here. And I just can't help but think that this overcomes a huge barrier for people, particularly getting everyone into the workforce. Transportation is one of the big barriers that I hear about getting the poor into the working population, is the cost of transportation. If we had a driverless system that was affordable and accessible, what a difference that would make in rural communities for accessibility for people who are living out in the country and maybe in more remote areas. And what a difference for people who choose to retire here rather than someplace else, because they still have the option of mobility and socialization and as well as access to medical care. So from the economic development perspective, I think this is it's a plus certainly in the metro areas. I see it as a real plus in the rural areas. So that's just a thought.
Thanks. We should make sure we articulate that, because I don't think that's thought of in the common business model for these technologies yet. That's the point of view that I think needs to get more articulated.
And I'll kind of add, kind of along the same lines from the economic development piece, what comes with it? I mean, if you think of a rural city that would take something like this on, certainly would be considered, I would say, a progressive city. And what does that bring with it? I mean, you can look around our economy and see some ebbs and some flows, and unfortunately we've got some ebbs going on. So how do we get beyond that, diversify our economy more? And technology is going to be what does that. We're still going to have wood, so we're going to need to cut the wood. We're still going to have some mines to be mined, but what else is going to diversify our economy? Why can't it be technology? Why couldn't it be something that has to do with this type of technology? Just the thought that, with this concept comes other things, I think, when people look at a community and say, wow, look at what that community's doing. Grand Rapids has kind of got that a little bit. So how can we even capitalize on that more?
Thank you. Thoughts from others? Questions? Any other thoughts from the panel? Dan, do you want any last words? From the graduate student perspective.
I don't think I have any off the top of my head.
This is why he works for me. Well, Myrna, I want to thank you for bringing this group together. The conversation here is it's been energizing for me. I more often than I ever thought I would in my life, find that I'm wearing the sheriff's title that he bestowed on me as the professor of thinkology or whatever, and that I'm supposed to keep announcing this technology is coming and this is what the benefit's going to be and so forth. But I don't have those answers unless I have heard from the people who are thinking about how this could be implemented and what those opportunities are. And so this is very terrific to hear from all of you that you came and had the time to express those thoughts. Vernon looks like he wants some last words.
I'm just wondering, Frank, if you could tell us, what's the next step now? What's the timeline? When can we hear from you again? What are the possibilities? Could Grand Rapids be that test pilot site? Are those questions you don't have answers for yet? Or what's your next step from here?
Well, I can tell you the next step. I can't give you answers to all those questions. The main next step, or next set of steps, is one that Dan's been going nuts taking notes over there, and so he's going to try to bring this into an articulated summary of what we heard that will eventually end up in our next report as part of this year's TPEC project work. That will also be grouped with what we hear in other similar groups that we want to convene around the state. That information goes to the legislature. We have an advisory board that has legislators on it, it has members of MnDOT on it, and so forth. So that word gets out. I cannot tell you exactly what would be the next step toward a demonstration. Mike may or may not want to verify me on this, but I've heard that MnDOT says that phase one was to identify the vehicle. Phase 2 is what they're testing right now, and possibly doing something on Nicollet Mall if all goes well. I've heard mention, I've seen presentations at conferences that phase 3 is to take the technology, if it continues to perform like they want it to, out into other parts of the state. And I believe Grand Rapids is one alternative they're looking at. I believe they also may be looking at like Rochester. So there probably is a lot of input and back and forth that will take place before that decision is made. I'm of the opinion that the model you folks talked about, start with one route that can be demonstrated, is the way to go. To the extent that they were to come back and say, you've been doing the research, where do you think this might be a place that works, that could make a difference where it's not been tried before? I'd say a setting like Grand Rapids is one that would be very appropriate. So it's not any sort of crystal ball ringing guarantee that anything will happen, but I hope it's a pretty strong endorsement.
Frank, is there any type of set model to run parallel with this to begin a public awareness campaign on, similar to our Share the Roadway up here with four-wheelers, combines, tractors, vehicles, everything that you're going to meet on the roads are educated? At what phase prior to implementation will the state start to do public service announcements about the autonomous drivers? You're going to see these on the road, here's what they look like. Will that run parallel to start getting people's mindset that these are out there, they're coming? And is there any plan for that to occur while it's in the testing phase?
I'm not aware of any plan. I presume that MnDOT's got a very good communications office. If they're in charge of where that deployment happens, they would try to get ahead of it to be able to provide that kind of information. I think the unknown, or at least the unknown to me, is that if the private sector continues to push this at paces that we just can't believe is going to happen until it happens, how well will they get out there and put that information forward? How well will they coordinate with those who are the keepers of the right-of-way to be able to get that information out there in a way that allows people to properly react to it, so that you don't have kids pushing other kids in front of a self-driving car just to see if they'll stop, and other kind of nightmare situations like that. As I say all that again is something that I think we should be articulating in our notes that we've not said before, is that there needs to, as the technology accelerates in its development, that there should be a role in the public sector to try and communicate that the change is coming, and get more people to think about it, to become aware of it, and to determine how they would like to see it deployed.
back over to Linda.
Yeah, if or when we ever have the next phase of the autonomous bus testing, it would be very visible. I just want to read the goals of that project just to have a more comprehensive idea of what the purpose of that is. We've got 6. The first is to identify the challenges of operating autonomous vehicle technology in snow, ice, and salt conditions, and test some potential solutions through field testing on an active public roadway. Number 2 is to identify the challenges and strategies of having third parties safely operate autonomous vehicles on the state transportation system. Number 3 is identify infrastructure gaps and solutions to safely operate autonomous vehicles and on the state transportation system. Number 4 is to prepare transit for improving mobility services through autonomous vehicles. Number 5 is to increase Minnesota's influence and visibility on advancing autonomous vehicles and connected vehicles. And number 6 is to enhance partnerships between government and industry on advancing autonomous vehicles, connected vehicles in Minnesota, and make a distinction between autonomous vehicles and connected vehicles, which is basically the same type of autonomous vehicles but with a driver.
Thanks for adding that specificity. I'm always wondering how much I should be saying what MnDOT said versus letting MnDOT be able to say what they want to say as this goes forward. Because I know that you always got to be careful preparing or stating that you want to do something at the Super Bowl, but you still have to test it first. So,
Frank, one question. How progressive is the state of Minnesota compared to the rest of the nation?
Regarding self-driving vehicles. Minnesota is bringing itself into the game, and there are advantages to taking that pace. The ones that were out front first were where you would expect. California, Silicon Valley is where Google is, and so forth. Michigan, because the big automakers got very excited about not losing their market share to high-tech companies in California. They are also, from my perspective, where I study policy and law, some of the poster children for how to get up too far ahead of what's going on and trying to legislate something that doesn't really exist yet. It's another 10-minute lecture about what happened in California and Michigan in terms of once their legislatures got done with their laws, how much damage they had done to the process. Whereas Minnesota has been able to follow that pack a little bit and now has the opportunity of a very visible Super Bowl to sort of show that we're being progressive on the snow and ice question. So Minnesota, I think, is moving their way up. They're being opportunistic. They were not first, but they're definitely showing that they no longer want to be last, if they ever did. But so I think Minnesota's in a pretty good place at this moment, and actually could be in a good place to look at questions that have not been explored yet, such as snow and ice, such as smaller towns, rural areas, such as making sure that you're providing a benefit to people who currently don't have the ability to drive.
If I could just say one other thing, as the legislator representing this area, Myrna, and our MnDOT friends, if there's anything that I can do to put Grand Rapids up there at the top of the list, I want to do that. So please let me know how I can be of help in a constructive way, hopefully, and not in a detrimental way.
Great. Now we have real commitments going on here.
Frank, I should share too, Myrna had a sign sheet. I think most of us have found it, but please feel free to find that because I will be able to follow up with you with a summary through that. And then find me today if you're interested. I would be happy to spread that matrix and SDB report either through email or however I can get that to you. One other point, I really appreciated Scott's point about the maneuverability of a police vehicle. I think that's a really interesting thought on this too. And off-road vehicles, because a lot of vehicles I can see transition to a self-driving vehicle, but points you made, Scott, about how you use a police car are interesting to consider.
No, there's certainly points where you would see an advantage to continuing to have a human driver or human oversight. You certainly would not want to say that nobody could never drive a vehicle again, ever. But there are situations where there could be a lot of advantages to letting the vehicles do most of the driving, or in some situations, all of it. Do we know where that, does anybody have that spreadsheet, the sign-in sheet in front of them?
It's outside the front.
It's outside the front door, so if you've not had a chance to sign in, that's where it is. Any other questions, thoughts? All right, well, again, I want to thank all of you for coming. This has been terrific information. As Myrna prompted me, and as Dan mentioned, we don't want to end the communication here. So we'll be getting information back to you. As you have thoughts, send them back our way. I've got cards. I had the contact information for Adil and me up on the last slide for a little bit there, and I can put that back up. But let's make sure that we stay in touch and keep this conversation going. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.